So, Brother Art, if you will, please go ahead and open the meeting with our motto.
Everybody raise your right fist in the air. Repeat after me. One God.
One God.
One aim.
One aim.
One destiny.
One destiny.
One destiny.
Africa.
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 For the Africans.
For the
For the
Africans.
Africans.
Those at home.
Those at home.
And those abroad.
And those abroad.
Race first, family.
Race first.
Race first. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to tonight's study session. We are studying race first, and we have questions from chapter 3 to chapter 5. Kind of like general overview questions. The plan is to proceed until we get to about chapter 7. And when we get to chapter 7, we're going to do, after we complete chapter 7, we're going to do a review session. And the review session is going to be focusing more on the type of questions that we will have on the exam. Also diving in more into some of the details from the book, and just getting us, more prepared and a deeper comprehension as we, get ready to do the second, third, and the last part of the book. So pretty much that's the plan. We'll go to 7. We got up to chapters 5, and these questions are chapters 3 to 5. I'm not sure if we'll cover all of that today, but that's what we'll try to do. And again, these questions are more kind of like a general overview. So don't worry if you weren't here from the very beginning. We are going to do a review once we get to chapter 7. We're going to dive into the book, dive into more of the questions that will be on our exam. And before we do the exam, we'll try to review everything one last time. So with no further ado, again, welcome everyone. Great that everyone could join us today. Appreciate you having on the call. Appreciate your feedbacks. And so with no further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with some questions from chapter 3. And before we get started, if anyone has any comments, suggestions, concerns, by all means, please let us know before we get rolling.
Just to clarify, we're starting with question 28.
No, we'll go down a little. It's just when I printed the pages, it was captured. We're gonna go down to where it says chapter 3. Chapter 3, and yes, that's it. So when I was printing it, I didn't get a chance to go back to the original and document and separate the pages. So we're starting with chapter 3. Anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, anything from last week's reading? If not, we can just go ahead and jump in. Okay, so chapter 3, the first question says, what were some early influence on Garvey's, what were some early influence on Garvey's ideological development? Some of the early influences that shape who Garvey is, who he turned out to be, sort of thing. Anyone want to take a shot?
I would say his family, his mother, father, and I think they spoke of like a uncle that had a hardworking ethic that was impressed upon Garvey at a young age. Those are a couple things that came to my mind.
Okay, okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just summarize that as family.
His family influence. Absolutely. Yes.
I would add Dr. Was it Joseph Robert Love? I know Tony probably would say Deuce Muhammad Ali, even though I wouldn't agree with that so much. And certainly there were many others like Edward Wilmot Blyden, who he read, and certainly one would presume, even though I don't think I recall him actually mentioning Martin Robinson Delaney, who was one of the African nationalists long before Mr. Garvey. But he was the first to state Africa for the Africans. But yeah, certainly Henry McNeill Turner and possibly Alexander Grimmel were among his influences, and most importantly to some, Honorable Booker Talaparo Washington. And some mentioned because he was on tour with Ida B. Wells that she may have been some influence. They were good friends. Certainly, her husband helped represent Mr. Garvey in court, Ferdinand Barnett. So, yeah, it was a lot of people who influence is a tricky word. Some can exploit that term to mean that, without them, there would be no Marcus Garvey, and that's kind of ridiculous. But but to say that he was, he was impacted by their presence and that kind of thing. Yeah, I could say, loosely, yeah, in some of those cases.
Absolutely. They help shape them in some form or the other. I would say.
Yeah, you got an echo, Sister Diane.
Those will all be, yes. Anyone else? Okay, so we can go ahead and review the answer. Okay, so early influences include his father. His father instilled in him a sense of pride in his African heritage, and also the works of, remember, when we go back, his father had an extensive library, and he was he just soaked up these books and read all the time. And then of course he was influenced by Mr. Booker T. Washington, which Mariama mentioned, amongst many others. And Washington, he was influenced by Washington's emphasis surrounding self-help, economic independence, and these kind of things. Okay, so if no one else has anything to add, we can look at question number 2, which asks, how did Garvey promote racial pride among Black people? What are some of the ways that Garvey promoted racial pride amongst Black people?
Well, I'd say a couple ways would be by producing Black doll babies, by giving voice to proponents of race pride through the Negro world, articles, poetry, etc., as well as his own, preaching, etc. Even the Black God concept did a lot to help us see our divinity to infinity. So he used a lot of tools to, help promote that ideal and popularize it amongst the race.
Yes, those are all true. Absolutely. Anyone else?
I tend to go towards the flag, red, black, and green flag being creating that as a symbol of pride, such that other nations, that's one less thing other nations had against us was the fact that we didn't have a flag in the nation of our own. So I would argue the flag went towards Mr. Garvey's promotion of pride and love.
That is definitely true. Yes. So if no one else has anything to add, we can go ahead and take a look at the answer
I'd
for
add,
question number 2.
The uniforms that he used to wear, the African legions and the Black Cross nurses, depicted, pride that we could do what we will.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So he promoted racial pride through his speeches, his writings. These are all some of the things we all touched on. Basically just embracing the Black heritage and the strive for self-improvement and all the different things, the flag or the uniform, Black Cross, nurse, just poetry, like we used to have cultural events that focus on Black pride and just being proud of our heritage and things of that nature. So all the things definitely contributed to that. Okay, so let's take a look at, no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at question number 3. And this one asks, why did Garvey emphasize economic self-sufficiency for Black people? Anyone want to take a shot at that one?
General theory of independence and being independent, not relying on others. So
Absolutely.
Black economy, an independent economy was a foundation to nationhood. So we have to have our own and our own economy through our own businesses.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say the Black man has no friends, so he has to do it on his own.
Right. Yes. Yes. is a gentleman. I'm trying to remember his name, but one of his favorite saying was Africa have no friends. John Henry Clark.
Yeah, it sounds like John Henry Clark.
Yeah, he said Africa have no friends. So the only friends we have is each other, or the only friends, that we don't realize we have, I should say, that we don't realize we have, because we don't really, practice the kind of unity that we should. Um, so yeah, that is true. So we can go ahead and take a look at the answer to number 3. And so, let's see, so self-sufficiency was crucial, because that's how we would that's one of the way Garvey saw us, as Brother John just said, independence. That's the way he saw that we could achieve true independence and gain the type of respect and power that we needed in society. And that is still kind of true today. We still aren't where we can be economically, and we still have a lot of work to get to. And more, but we have a long way to go. So we have to put our brains together, put our minds together, put our hearts together, and come up with ways that we can emancipate ourselves, so to speak, emancipate our race economically. So question 4 asks, what were Garvey's view on racial integration? Anyone want to take a shot at that one? Garvey's view on racial integration.
The integration
He
never
believes
built
in
no
being
nation.
Okay, I like that. Okay,
Yeah,
anyone else?
um, yeah, I believe Mr. Garvey, actually used the term segregation, but he was saying that, willful segregation was more so his policy. To each their own, and we can, come together once we're all, able to see each other, on the same playing field. But, if we can't see each other as equals, he was not a proponent of, integration. Well, he wasn't a proponent of integration, period, but especially not as equals.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Considering if you married outside your race, you couldn't be an officer in the UNIA. And I think he felt one of the biggest sins that you could have would be to marry someone outside your race. You thereby would be transferring your wealth, our wealth, to the other race, and that was a big sin. That was unforgivable.
Yeah. Specifically, Attorney Motep, to quote it directly, a rich Negro to marry a poor white was an unpardonable sin.
Right. Right.
But the concept, you're right in concept.
Yes. Because it can significantly impact, it can be a significant economic impact. So. Anyone else? Okay, if no one else has anything to add, we'll go ahead and reveal the answers, which is gonna be pretty much on point to some of the answers we just Brother John and Brother Art. He was skeptic, because he believed that Black people should focus on building their own institutions and communities rather than seeking acceptance from white society.
Mhm.
So absolutely. And I think that was the philosophy that was applied when we had, places like Black Wall Street. We kind of got it then. I think we got it then, and we had many Black Wall Streets that were, of course, destroyed in some form or the other. But I think also, had that not happened, you would see more Black Wall Streets. But at the end of the day, we have to keep the focus. We can't get derailed and lose our focus because things happen to take us off track. Anyone has anything to add to that, or if not, we could take a look at question number 5. Which says, how did Garvey view the role of Africa in his ideological framework? Anyone?
Africa is meant to be headquarters for the sovereign nation on the continent of Africa is the words that I remember being part of our goal. So we have to build the continent, civilize the backwards tribes as part of the Constitution, assisting independent Negro nations and communities. But to my understanding, that was base of operations. We would have a sovereign nation on the continent of Africa, which would be the headquarters for all Africans at home and abroad.
Yes. Yes, and I think there were some things being put in place to make that happen, but propaganda, derailment from insiders and outsiders. But I think that should still be a focus. I think that's when, we'll have a true, just imagine Africa like China in terms of you have China diasporas that have China as their backing and, truly independent, sovereign, true sovereignty. We're working on it, but we're not quite there.
Yeah.
Anyone else has anything to add to that one?
Yes, he felt that he really, he didn't look to Jamaica as being his home so much when he had, well, it was just a little island where he had Africa. Well, we had Africa,
Yeah.
continent. So he, I think that was an ideological framework
Yes.
for this thinking.
But absolutely. Bob Marley used to say, why settle for an island when you have a whole continent? So definitely, yes,
You got
yes.
that from Garvey.
He did.
Yes.
Okay, so there you go. There you go. Yes. Okay. If no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at the answer, which is gonna be on point to what we're saying. And basically that Garvey viewed Africa as the ancestral homeland of Black people and believed it should be a strong, independent nation that could serve as a refuge and source of pride for the African diaspora or for African people globally. That would be a beautiful thing for that to be that way. It's like that to some extent, but it's work still going on the continent. We just saw what happened in Kenya recently, but what happened in Kenya also shows that, you know, the people are rising up and they want something different than what exists today. And I think with that spirit of revolution and what we can offer, I think it could be a reality, and probably sooner than most of us are thinking. No one else has anything to add. We can take a look at question number 6.
I just say quickly that Kenya is a byproduct of Pan-Africanism. Had we had Garveyism, we wouldn't have that problem today. Pure African nationalism.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And question 6 asks, what steps did Garvey take to promote cultural revitalization among Black people? Anyone?
I'm gonna guess, I'm gonna say institutions, creation of institutions to study our history and our culture, as well as to promote our history and culture. But through institutions would be my thought.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was gonna say building industries, businesses, stores, hotels, and all that sort of thing.
Okay, all right. So we can go ahead and take a look at that answer. And so we see that he promoted cultural revitalization by organizing events that celebrated African heritage, encouraging the study of African history, and supporting the creation of Black-owned business and institutions. Absolutely. Institutions. Okay.
I would add
And
that he created this thing called the Harlem Renaissance as well.
yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, Dr. Tony Martin, one of his later works, Literary Garveyism, he was engaged in an argument with Skip Gates over who was the father of the Harlem Renaissance, Alain Locke or Marcus Garvey. So, you know, Tony certainly felt that Mr. Garvey had more to do with that, constructing the Harlem Renaissance and inspiring it. So he wrote a book and then sent a copy of it to Skip Gates, and looking at Mr. Garvey's contribution to all the prominent Harlem Renaissance writers, etc. And Skip Gates finally conceded that he was right. That Mr. Garvey had was more responsible than Elaine Locke. So anyway, that's another to review that's useful in making that argument. But yeah, and Ezekwe, Nnamdi Ezekwe also kind of conceded that as well, even though he was a student of Elaine Locke at Howard University before he became the president of Nigeria. He also was a profoundly, staunch Garveyite. So he also credited Mr. Garvey as being the source and force behind the Harlem Renaissance. So it wasn't really a Harlem Renaissance, it was the Garvey Renaissance, the cultural Renaissance. Anyway.
Yes, definitely. I'd agree with that. If no one else has anything to add, we can look at the answer to question 7.
Well, I don't think we didn't ask about question 7 yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're on, I thought we did 6, didn't we?
Yeah, we just finished 6. We didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. We're right. You're right. Yes. So okay. So why was Black unity a central theme in Garvey's ideology? Sorry about that. I'm going ahead of myself. Why was Black unity a central theme in Garvey's ideology? Anyone?
Yeah, I'd say that Mr. Garvey felt that our greatest enemy was disorganization, and that our failure to use our collective strength is the source of our powerlessness. So by, as one of his quotations say, that if we must have justice, we must come together. We must come together, but we must be strong, rather. If we must be strong, we must come together. We must come together. We can only do so with a system of organization. So in organizing and mobilizing our people, we were able to get the strength and power we need to exact justice and, accomplish anything that we will. Just separated, we would be unable to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Collective strength. And yes, Garvey did say that our disunity is part of our downfall. So yes, I tend to agree with that. Anyone else?
Yeah. Wherever he traveled, he said he saw the Black people were the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak. And to change things, we had to be unified.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
No.
I would say, unity is a fundamental principle in what we are trying to achieve. If we are trying to show a successful example of self-reliance of our race, we have to be unified to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. No one else? Go ahead and see. So Black unity was central to Garvey's ideology because he believed that only through collective action. Yeah, Brother Imhotep was talking about collective strength. So Garvey's saying that only through collective action and solidarity could Black people overcome oppression and achieve their goals. So absolutely, all of our answers were correct. Okay, if no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at question number 8. And so question number 8 asks, how did Garvey's opposition to colonialism manifest in his work? Anyone?
His writings would be the first thing to come to my mind.
Okay. All right. That is true. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say that his organizing of the Liberian settlement is the grounds to not only develop industry for the race, but also the grounds to launch a campaign for decolonization on the continent of Africa. Was one way he demonstrated his ideology through his work, as well as his delegation to the League of Nations and
Yep. That's me.
his efforts to even approach the president of the United States to give us our 40 acres and a mule by supporting the repatriation campaign. Which he did get a lot of support politically through Congressman
Yes,
Roy Miller and others. So his actions reflected his interests.
absolutely. Anyone else?
Yeah, the fact that he was an African nationalist and the motto Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. If no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at question number 8. So Garvey's opposition to colonialism manifest in his call for the end of European rule in Africa, his support for independence movements, and his advocacy for self-governance for Black people worldwide. And as the brother mentioned earlier, he traveled and he saw the condition, and it really bothered him. And there was his mission in life to change that. And if no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at question number 9.
Yes, just one thing here to add. Back in the day there, and it speaks to that question, it's manifested his calls for the end of European rule in Africa. I would think now today, and somewhat so even back then, that we need to add, since the Europeans are gone, the Arabs are there today. So still, I would think Africa for the Africans would be applicable to the Arabs in Africa.
Well, yeah, definitely. But the sad thing is, from what I'm understanding, the Europeans never left. So Africa got their independence, but it was just symbolism, like a fake independence. And they have what we now call neo-colonialism. And it's not just Europeans, it's the Arabs, the Chinese, the Indians. You know, these are the ones that are the folks that control the industries, some more than others. But Africa for the Africans is truly not that way. And the worst part, of course, is, you know, the young population that are educated. A lot of them are very educated, but they're jobless. And then, as we saw recently, that happened in Kenya, you know, taxes and things like that, that Ruto was trying to bring about through the influencing of the West. So we've got a long road to travel, but at least the people, the young kids, I guess the Gen X kids, what they call them, they were rising up to, you know, to show their dissatisfaction with the way things are being run, and you know, dissatisfaction of not having the Africa that they want. So, and Africa has everything that it needs and more. They're just not controlling what they're blessed with. So
Yeah, they're changing.
that's the long. I'm
I
sorry,
look-
brother.
They're changing. I looked at Senegal in the elections they had. They elected a very young president.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he's an African nationalist, so he wants France out of there right now, you know, so
Yes.
it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, and Guinea, I think it's Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, already kicked France out.
Kicking them out. They're already kicking them out.
Yeah, they already
Guinea
kicked them
Bissau,
out.
Yeah.
And all the countries that have kicked France out are doing better right now.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see more of that. I think we're gonna see more of that.
Yeah.
But you know, we could talk about those things all day. So
Yeah, that's
anyone
right.
else anyone else has anything to add? Good changes are coming. If no one else has anything to add, we could go ahead and look at the answer for question number 9.
I don't think we discussed question 9 yet.
I'm sorry, Brother John.
We already went over the answer for number 9.
No, we're we're still on. Man, I'm ahead of myself again. I thought we just answered
We just answered 8.
Garvey's opposition to colonialism.
Yes.
And then, yeah, we were on the Pan-African question, weren't we? What is Pan-Africanism? Oh, we didn't do that one yet.
Not to my knowledge.
My bad. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, man. Okay. Right. We were talking about European. Okay. So what is Pan-Africanism and how did Garvey contribute to this movement? And okay. So I'm
question, but it wouldn't be the same way that Tony would. Mr. Garvey attributed Pan-Africanism one bit, except to warn us to stay the heck away from those Pan-African folks. So I know Tony loosely used the word to refer to people who were, you know, looking at Africa as all one people, but that's not the tradition and origin of the term at that time. And Mr. Garvey couldn't stand the term, and warned us to stay out of that frying pan. We might get burnt along with them, who were pushing
Okay.
a contrary narrative to the African nationalists at that time, who were, the Pan Africanists were trying to extend the international arm of the Talented Tenth movement into Africa and have their mulatto supremacists go over there and regulate and rule the Negroes with their white Protestant ethic, in the illusion of giving us justice. But more white folks attended some of the Pan African Congresses than black. So Mr. Garvey used to criticize them religiously in their operation. But in hindsight, the historical revisionists come along and make it seem like he was a proponent of the ideology, when history has proven that there's no way in the world was he anyway affiliated or would be associated with that clan and its silliness. So I know that's not what Tony would say, but Tony is a Garvey scholar, but he wasn't exactly a diehard Garvey, I should say. I mean, he was a good man, and he was defensive of Mr. Garvey, but he only joined the association for some of the benefits it would help with his career so much. He was kind of open about that. Of course, he married someone outside of the race himself, so he, some limitations on what his opinions would be worth to a Garveyite. But anyway, I didn't want to spoil the answer, but but I just had to state the truth as I know it. So anyway.
And for some of these, there's like no one answer. In fact, yeah, it's multiple answer because there are multiple facts pertaining to the same scenario. So absolutely.
So the question is, though, what is Pan-Africanism?
Yeah.
And did Garvey contribute anything to this movement? That's the question.
Yeah, well, definitely, I would say absolutely nothing.
So you say he did not contribute anything to the Pan-African movement?
No, not a thing. Except opposition. He contributed the chief opponent to it.
Yeah,
to me,
go ahead. Somebody was gonna say something.
I was gonna say when I used to hear the word Pan-Africanism, before my exposure to this body of information that we're all, studying, my thought process was it was just somebody who, even though they were not, on the African continent, just has a sense of knowing that they have roots in Africa, have a sense of pride in Africa, wanting to go back to Africa, to explore Africa, cares about what's going on in Africa. But I'm sure it's deeper than that. But that's how I used to think when I hear the word Pan-Africanism. Just someone of African descent who really know that they have ties to Africa and care about what goes on in Africa. But I'm sure Brother Mariama may have a different definition, because from what I'm understanding, what you're saying, it became like the cliche thing, the word Pan-Africanism. Or
Right. Yeah, over time, it just like with communism, socialism, the definition evolved over time. That's why they had the Trotskyists, Leninists, Stalinists, everybody having their different opinions. Most communists were fighting with each other, didn't know what exactly how to define it. Pan-Africanism stemmed from a colored intellectual association that were filled with mostly half whites or people who were married to whites. Miscegenationists or mulattoes were the colored intellectuals who founded. Henry Sylvester Williams married to white woman. Anna Julia Cooper, half white. Frederick Eugene Richelieu married to a white woman, people who were at the first
Listen,
Pan-African
listen,
Conference.
listen. All these Negroes in America got some kind of white in them somewhere, because them people was raping our. We don't can't
But they
even
were not.
with that.
Uh,
We need to talk specifically, and Pan Africanism. Does the African continent? Do those countries need to come together and work as one? If we say Africa for the Africans and those abroad, then what was the Pan African movement?
that's what I was trying to explain.
What did the Pan Africanists want? We can't talk about no colored people, because guess what we all used to call ourselves? Colored people.
Exactly. Well, that's what they call themselves.
Even back in the day when Garvey was around, we was colored people.
Well, that's not colored people were actually reserved. It was as a connotative meaning, which meant those who didn't want to be called black or Negro. So they called themselves colored because they had what they call a stroke of the tar brush. So these were people who were the upper tens, who were the half whites or the quarter white or whatever, who considered themselves socially superior. That's what the whole Talent Tenth was about, reversing the browning of white America and whitening black America through a certain political process of getting the most educated top 10 Negroes and marrying them with light-skinned women, and then getting those light-skinned educated women to marry the white women.
This question, however,
So,
what was Pan-Africanism? Specifically, what was Pan-Africanism?
It was a philosophy of white folks and some of their Negroes who wanted
It was a
to.
philosophy for Africans.
No, it wasn't. Again, it has the word African in it.
Who am I speaking with? What's your name, my brother?
Moriama. UNIA historian for about 25 years. Now, I'm telling you, when it comes to
I've been a Pan-Africanist for about 50 years. For me.
Well, let's just use for example, the All African People Revolutionary Party have a term. Their Pan-Africanism is the complete liberation of Africa under scientific socialism.
Okay.
Is that what Garvey was talking about? No, he wasn't talking about no scientific socialist. He wasn't. The term for Pan-African can be used a lot of different ways, but none of it was African nationalism. From the beginning, from when Du Bois and Henry Sylvester and all these colored intellectuals were advocating it, they weren't talking about Africa's independence. They were talking about Africa being at least another 100 years enslaved to Europeans until they were ready to accept the white Protestant ethic, and then they'd be ready for some kind of self-government, some form of self-government. But he was no way advocating black people be independent or Africa get its independence. In fact, Du Bois used to tell people that we wouldn't like it in Africa. We'd burn to death and we'd get, all kinds of mosquito bites. And, he was trying to scare people away from Africa because this is what Pan-Africanism was teaching. And that's why Mr. Garvey had a completely different group. And they had banned, the Garveyites from dealing with the Pan-African Congress. And the Pan-African Congress actually banned Mr. Garvey from coming, making an appearance at their Congress. But these two were bitterly, ideologically at war with one another. Now, it was years later, into 1945, when some of the radicals who were half Garveyites and pro-intellectual, socialists at the time, who co-opted the NAACP-sponsored Pan-African Congress, and they started to change the meaning and kind of radicalize the Pan-African long after Mr. Garvey was dead, the term became more popular and people identified it with some other things. But even then, it still was people like George Padmore, who was married to a white woman, C.L.R. James, who was married to a white woman, who was the chief ideologues, along with Nkrumah, who was marrying a white woman, as well as Jomo, who was marrying a white woman. So all these people, they weren't African nationalists like Garveyites. They were Pan-Africanists, and they were pushing another line completely different from what the UNIA was pushing. And when Mr. Nkrumah used to talk about Africa for the Africans, he made sure he clarified, I'm not talking the kind that Marcus Garvey's talking. I'm talking about continentalism. He's talking about where the Arabs are there, let the Arabs stay and run that part of Africa. But the whites are, let them keep running South Africa. But he was about the African people who live in Africa running Africa, but not necessarily a race-based African nationalism. So his beliefs and ideologies, was never parallel with Mr. Garvey. So I'm just clarifying that point, that even though some loosely use the term, it has zero to do with anything related to Marcus Garvey and African nationalism. People who like Edward Blyden, he couldn't stand mulattoes. In fact, he said on his deathbed, on his grave tombstone, he want to write, "I hate mulattoes" on there. Same thing with John Edward Bruce, who was a staunch Garveyite, was not a friend of those who were, playing that race game, trying to, socially integrate with the white folks and use their westernized cultural proclivities to gain some kind of advantage in the American or Western society. These were the ones who were, again, opposed to the Garvey movement. So the Pan-Africanists were a branch of the NAACP, literally, who financed the first 4 Pan-African Congresses. And the UNIA had its own international conventions, but we were talking totally different ideologies. So saying all that to say, again, Mr. Garvey contributed in no way to the NAACP nor their Pan-African Congresses, even though the term, again, has been, glossed over and changed up and used. Everybody has a million definitions for it today. And in hindsight, they want to try to use the term. But at that time, you might have got your lips smacked calling a Garveyite a Pan-African. You would never find any one of us using that term in no, newspaper, Negro World, Afro-American, no paper, nowhere. So anyway, just pointing that historical fact out.
Yeah, that is true. They've taken a lot of terms and changed it over the years when it comes to us. But for other people, you don't see that happening. And that's a whole study in itself to me. Anyone
Yes.
has anything else to add?
Yes, I
Go
want
ahead,
to thank Wariyama. He got me straight about what is Pan-Africanism and whether Garvey was a Pan-Africanist or not. There is on the Garvey channel on YouTube a segment entitled "Garvey Was Not a Pan-Africanist," and I would encourage everyone to check it out. And as the brother was saying, that it's a history of who were the Pan-Africanists. A lot of them were married to Europeans. The Europeans helped fund the Pan-Africanist conferences. They were members of the meetings there. So I can see Garvey never attended any one of those Pan-African conferences. And so I then started to look, well, what is a African nationalist? And I can see where Garvey was an African nationalist. He wasn't a Pan-Africanist. And as the brother was saying, I guess the definition of what is a Pan-Africanist has changed over the years. And back then it was not what it is today. And people loosely, as this question kind of indicates, tying Garvey to being a Pan-Africanist. And he wasn't. Thank goodness. Race first.
Race first. Thank you for that, Brother Imhotep. Okay, so we can take a look at the answer to that if no one else has anything to add, because the answer kind of holds true with with how I guess Garvey defined it at the time. It's the idea of solidarity among all people of African descent, and unified. And Garvey contributed by promoting a unified Africa and organizing Black people globally through the UNIA. So we saw what Garvey did with the organizing of Black people globally, something that has never been done or has been done since. So I think the Pan-Africanism that he represented is not the cliche Pan-Africanism that exists today. And I think African nationalism would probably be a fit. So I guess we just have to kind of know. We just have to know that a lot of things been influenced and watered down, and so I can see where there is why Garvey wouldn't want to be called, I guess, a Pan-Africanism. He was more about African solidarity, African nationalism, which is not the same thing, correct?
So what are you saying Pan-Africanism is?
The best way to define, and it has different meanings to different people, but the best way to define it is by looking at what its chief ideologues over the years have defined it as, which is not nationalistic in the sense of African self-reliance, is not nationalistic in the sense of the black family and not marrying into other races, etc. It has no nationalistic core to it. It's only about, to some extent, civil rights to some people in Africa if they comply with European colonial dictates. If you look at the first Pan-African conference that was organized by the Pan-African Association in 1900, their whole agenda, first of all, was more whites there than blacks at the conference. In fact, one of the colonizers was at the actual conference right after coming from the Berlin conference. He decided to host the Pan-African conference with his half-white friends. And so anyway, while he was there, they were talking about, giving some breaks on holidays to some of the African enslaved workers, and maybe allowing them to get some education and things like that. They wanted to relieve them of some of the challenges, but they didn't want to liberate them. But they just wanted to feel like they can extend their civil rights arm to Africa and, say they were fighting for the people. But it had nothing to do with any shape, form, or fashion of universal African nationalism, which is what, Mr. Garvey was talking, but was completely, different from what they were pushing. So they had a interest in Africa, people being treated better to some extent, but they would go but so far with that. And in fact, when people thought Marcus Garvey was coming to a Pan-African Congress, half of the people left out of the group and decided to abandon it because they didn't want nothing to do with him, because he was talking something totally different from what they were talking, including what's the guy's name, Blaise Diagne. That's how you spell it, Blaise Diagne. But anyway, it was, he was one of the chairs of the meeting. And, he just even hinted that the boys might have been working with the Garvey, and that's it. I'm out of here. I'm not, I got me a white woman and I love her, and I'm not doing this. And so, I mean, it was a certain mentality amongst the Pan-Africanists that were diametrically opposed to the Garveyites and the African nationalists at that time. Always had been, but people just merged them all together as if they were always just talking one thing, but they never were talking one thing. There was always that undercurrent. So anyway, yeah, but Pan-Africanism, you ask anybody today, they'll tell you anything. But it isn't Garveyism. This is clearly a distinct thing. Now, somebody can see it, their version of Pan-Africanism is close to what Mr. Garvey is talking. But by the definition of most people who were the leading figures in the movement, who defined and wrote the pivotal pieces, they call Padmore one of the fathers, Pan-African Revolution, and whatever, and Du Bois is one of the fathers of Pan-African, blah blah blah. None of these people ideologies were in any way compatible with Mr. Garvey's. So we everything we used to do, would claim it as like universal African. Like the Universal African Black Cross Nurses, Universal African Legion. The pledge talks about the Universal African Nationalism. We didn't do that Pan-African stuff in there. Again, this is other people, revisionists coming on later and throwing that moniker to Mr. Garvey. But, I don't ascribe to that.
Yes. I think it's better to say that you're a Garveyite than a Pan-Africanist.
No, not a Pan-Africanist.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's better to say you're a Garveyite rather than a Pan-Africanist.
As people know who you are.
Even though this definition that you're giving here today says that Pan-Africanism was the idea of solidarity among all people of African descent.
Yeah, that's what Tony Martin.
That's what Garvey wanted, but everybody kind of attached their own spin to that word. But what he was saying is that during Garvey's time, he didn't really consider himself a Pan-Africanist.
You know, the similarities, like when Malcolm was around, he was, and I don't want to belabor the point, I guess, either, but Malcolm was not an advocate of civil rights. Some people would say he had friends who were civil rights, that he, came to certain events, etc. But he called himself a human rights advocate because he felt if you had human rights, you don't need to beg the white man to treat you better and give you some civil rights. And like Garvey, he believes in declaring our rights. And daring somebody to violate them versus begging the white man to give us something that really not his to give. But if you call Malcolm a civil rights activist, some people do, and I say that's wrong. That's not what he would have considered himself. He never used a label for himself, but people ascribe that to him. But I'm a loyalist when it comes to that kind of label. If it's something that they chose, then yeah, I would use it. But if he's not choosing, I'm not gonna, go along with the in crowd and push a contrary narrative on him. It's not, his legacy.
Yes, that does make sense. When you listen to Malcolm X, he never says civil rights. He talks about human rights, and that makes sense. Absolutely. If no one else has anything to add, we can go to question 10. And I know that it's some of this topic we can go on, if we can just keep talking about them. But thank you for that clarification, Brother Mariama, because I think I'm guilty of using the word interchangeably. I think, okay, I'm a Garveyite, so I'm a Pan-Africanist. But sometimes, folks get in your stuff and they kind of twist your narrative. That's why we always have to own our narrative and know our history. So that's one good example. Thank you so much. If no one else has anything to add, we can move to question number 10, which asks, how did religion influence Garvey's ideology? Anyone?
I would argue this another fundamental component of Garvey's ideology.
Say that again, Brother John. I'm sorry.
I said I would argue that was a fundamental component of Garvey's ideology. I believe he eventually became a Catholic, but I know influence played it. I mean, religion had a major influence on Garvey's ideology as well as some of the principles within the UNIA.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say more his spiritual convictions than religious. Even though, like we had mentioned before, that one writer once called this the institution of a civil religion, and that we had certain. It wasn't really dogma, but there was, we're an ecclesiastical association, so there are certain, mantras and mottos and things that we're going to be said that we're going to try to ingrain, but it wasn't a dictation of anybody's religion. Yet they had to believe this particular prophet or this particular God by this name or anything religious. It was more spiritual, conscientious spiritual worship, as the aims and objects say. And so he had his personal belief. I wouldn't say his personal belief. It helped him with his conviction, and it gave him a worldview of Yeshua, aka Jesus Christ, as being a great representative of sacrifice, the standard bearer of sacrifice, he used to call him. But aside from that, I mean, Mr. Garvey didn't really push his religion and his ideology. In fact, he was quite critical of a lot of religious leaders, as well as the Bible itself. Which, again, he had a quote about not believing everything in that lying Bible. So there were times where he was quite critical of people being blind faith followers in religion and not using their intelligence to really, conscientiously worship the Almighty and see ourselves as unitary parts of the greater, all intelligent being. So, I mean, to say his religion influenced his ideology, I wouldn't say religion, but his spiritual convictions, I would say. It may sound like a difference, but that's how I would word it anyway, if I had to.
Okay. Okay. I would say he wasn't big on religion so much, but he accepted people of different faith or background as members, but it wasn't his hang up, from what I understood. He wasn't a religious guy.
But the question is, how did religion influence his ideology? Did his Christianity influence his ideology?
I would say to some extent, yes, because even in our course in African philosophy, he dedicated a whole chapter to talking about God and talking about the unitary intelligence, and he had a whole chapter on Jesus also. So, but he always look at it from the Black man's perspective. So in that regard, yeah, I would say it did influence his ideology. Anyone else? Okay, if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at the answer. And it says religion influenced Garvey's ideology through his belief in the divine destiny of Black people and his use of religious imagery and and language to inspire and mobilize his followers. Okay. All right. Education. So what were Garvey's view on the importance of education for Black people? Anyone?
Another fundamental.
Yes.
Foundational, but I don't want to say too much.
Education was a medium by which people prepared for the advancement of their particular civilization.
Say that again, brother.
Education is the medium by which the people are prepared to advance their particular civilization. So
Right.
it was an important tool, to guide us in, our movement for improvement as we build a greater civilization at home and abroad.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, if no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at the answer to question 11. So Garvey believed education was essential for the empowerment of Black people, advocating for the establishment of Black-run schools and the inclusion of Black history and culture in the curriculum. So he saw that it was essential. Education was essential. Okay. If no one else has anything to add to that, we could look at
No, I just,
question number. I'm
I just,
sorry.
no. I just want to say, yeah, through our Tuesday programs as well as the Saturday orientation, I think that's the best example that we have modern UNIA having regular education programs. Regular education programs. So just want to commend you, Sister Diane, for your efforts in the Tuesday study group of Race First.
Thank you so much, Brother John, and thank you all for going through the journey of this educational process with me. Yes. So if no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at question number 12, which asks, what was Garvey's perspective on the role of women in the Black liberation movement? Anyone?
I mean, I have to just say, just as necessary as the men, required, specifically, sisters, where the head of Black Cross Nurses and African Motor Corps, but that balance is just something that I think is required for the success of the UNIA.
Yes. Anyone else? Okay. If no one else has anything, we can reveal the answer to that one. And that one basically reads that Garvey recognized the importance,
So
the important role.
So Diane, I think Brother Eric had a comment in the chat, but we're good now.
Oh, we can look at that. We can take a look at that, Brother John.
Well, it looks like he asked as key players. So I think he's talking about Garvey's perspective on the role of women in the Black liberation movement as key players.
Yes, yes, because many women served key roles and held position of leadership. So absolutely. So this was something that Garvey advocated, and key players, key roles, position of leadership. It wasn't just a Black Cross nurse, but of course, Black Cross nurse was significant. Yes.
And both of his wives have helped him out in that movement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Amy Ashwood and Amy Jock.
Yes. What a coincidence, huh? Both Amy's.
Yeah.
I want to point out too that a lot of the, not only organizationally, that he include women at the highest, position of the association, but even in the industry, some of the first women to operate a multi-million-dollar corporation were in the UNIA. We know about Madam C.J. Walker and others, but
Yeah,
Yes,
Madam
you know,
Secretary, for sure.
yeah, but Henrietta Davis
absolutely.
and Amy Ashwood, they directed Black Star Line, the Black Cross Trade Navigation,
That's right.
as well as a
Wow.
lot of industries.
Yes, absolutely. Mhm. Okay. So, if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at question 13. And it asks about what economic plan did Garvey propose for the upliftment of Black people?
Couple things come to my mind. First would be Black Star Line, I think would be probably the best answer. Negro World paper would be up there. But I would also throw the 5-year plan in there as well. But Black Star Line would probably be the best answer.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, well, the idea of the African Communities League, modeled after Booker T. Washington's National Negro Business League, was one of the most comprehensive blueprints for Black power ever designed and constructed. And Mr. Garvey, if you look at all the different areas, when he established the Articles of Incorporation for the ACL, I mean, this thing covers every known business industry there is, and he certainly exercised every effort to, tap into all the industries and many that we don't even know about. I even had letters from the local division in Washington where he was writing people about buying a company that was producing embalming fluid. Black folks were doing. But anyway, there was so many, we know about the doll factories, the millineries, the publishing companies, the hotels, and the university, blah, 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 blah. But there was a whole lot more industries that he was focusing on. So, the ACL or African Communities League was, the mother corporation of all those entities, and was trying to rally African people, communities all over the globe to be working together in industry, the same way we see, Latinos and other communities coming together and taking over hospitality industry, or taking over the grocery industry, taking over transportation, taking over this, and yet we don't have one Black owned chain grocery store in all of the Caribbean, that's owned by us, chain store. So that kind of concept, we ever needed Garveyism before, we sure do need it now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. Anyone else? If no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at, so Garvey proposed plans such as the establishment of the Negro Factories Corporation to create jobs, and the Black Star Line to facilitate international trade and economic independence. So certainly that answer includes some of the things that we all touched on. The Black Star Line, of course, Negro World, 5-year plan, African Communities League are all part of that. Thank you guys for that answer. Brother Mariamar, if you could turn your volume up just a tad, we could hear you, but it may just be from my end. I hear you, but I have to kind of turn my ear up a little bit. So if you
No,
could,
is this better?
oh, better, way better. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. All right, so moving right along, we can take a look at question. We did 13. We just finished 13, right? Yes. So now we're looking at 14. Okay. Make sure I don't get ahead of myself again. So 14 said, ask, how did Garvey's self-help philosophy shape his approach to Black empowerment? You know, Garvey was a big advocate of doing for self. So how did his self-help philosophy shape his approach to Black empowerment? Anyone? If no one has anything to add with that one, we can
Yeah,
look
he
at,
said, up your mighty race, accomplish what you will. So you're going to have to do it. Your self-help, you're going to have to do it yourself.
absolutely, Sister Amina. Absolutely. We can't sit around and wait for it to be done for us. Absolutely. Yes. He says what one man can do, another can do. Or I might not be saying that right, but anything that's possible and has been done by another human being, we could accomplish. So that was his it was no excuse philosophy about doing for self.
Yes, ma'am. What man has done, man can do.
Exactly. Thank you, Brother John. Exactly. Absolutely. If no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at the answer to 14.
Yeah, I would just add quickly that it's interesting to note that some of the first credit unions and banks in New York were founded by Garveyites, like Charles
Yes.
Leone and F. Levi Lord, and others who were officers in the UNIA would be the first to form institutions. That's another
Yes.
example of his self-help philosophy, impacting our empowerment.
Yes. I think at the end of the day, we just have to figure out how to get serious about our stuff, practice unity and Black excellence, and not allow people to derail our stuff. Because when you look at even that, I mean, credit unions, bank, we really had it going on, but now it's like we're like suffering from amnesia or something. So we have a long ways to go again, and it's an amazing thing to study when you look at it. But I think we're getting it, and we need to get back to where we were. So yeah, absolutely. Credit unions and banks. So we had the right ideas, and now we have a few, but not enough. So if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at the answer to Garvey's self-help philosophy. So the self-help philosophy emphasized self-reliance, entrepreneurship, and the importance of Black people taking control of their economic and social destiny. Exactly. Exactly right. We got to take control, especially on the African continent, because yeah, it is it's not an option, it's a necessity, as they say. So if no one has anything to add, we can take a look at 15, which talks about Garvey's critique of other leaders. And the question asks, how did Garvey critique other Black leaders and organizations of his time? Anyone?
Let me see. What's the question again?
How did Garvey critique other Black leaders and other organizations of his time that existed during his time?
Yeah, I think that's another broad one. I go anywhere from WB WB Du Bois, Paul Robeson, even Haile Selassie. He was critical of all of them through his editorials in either Negro World or Black Man Magazine.
Okay, that
But
is true. This one definitely.
yeah, it was usually based
Go
upon
ahead.
it was usually based upon, well, for different reasons, I would guess. So W.B. Du Bois more so a proponent of integration, um, and a talented tenth, and that would be something that Mr. Garvey would criticize. Um, Paul Robeson, Mr. Garvey criticized his, um, uh, celebrity and potential, as a voice for Black people, but he seemed to only, do what he was told in order to maintain his celebrity status, but not much in regards to the benefit of Africans globally. And then Haile Selassie was criticized for his military strategy, let's just say.
Okay. And this is definitely one that has multiple answers.
Hmm.
Yes. Okay. Anyone, if no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at the answer to that one.
I would just say quickly that he would criticize leaders in the vein of his philosophy or his worldview. So, he was a strong leader, and he was one who was very principled in his stance on African nationalism. So if they did not, live up to that standard, he would criticize them at times and praise them at other times.
Absolutely. I remember in the previous chapter, he called someone a yes massa negro. So absolutely, he was not shy about voicing his opinion when it comes to that. So yes, so the answer says he critiqued other Black leaders and organizations for what he saw as their accommodationist approach and lack of focus on economic independence and racial pride. So they were more accommodating, I guess, to other races rather than focusing on economic independence and racial pride, which we saw that Garvey did unapologetically. I mean, when he wanted the young Black girls to have something in their image, he made the doll factory. I mean, he was a person that lived what he didn't talk one talk and live a different way. He totally was exemplary in what he talked about. and he was unapologetic about it. Yes. If no one else has anything to add, we can look at question number 16. And question number 16 asks, what was Garvey's vision of a Black nation and how did he plan to achieve it? Anyone? I think we may have touched on this one earlier, but anyone want to take a shot? If not, we can take a look at the answer to this one.
Sovereign nation on the continent of Africa,
Yes, yes,
for those at home and those abroad.
yes. That is true. That is true. That's pretty much it. But let's see the answer there. So Garvey's vision of a Black nation involved the creation of an independent African state governed by Black people, achieved through economic development, unity, and international advocacy. Absolutely. Yes. And if no one else has anything to add to that, we could take a look at question number 17. And question number 17 talks about Garvey's use of propaganda and asks how Garvey used propaganda to advance his cause. Anyone?
I mean, I know it's another fundamental component. How did he use it? He had the Negro World magazine was his primary form of propaganda, printed in different languages, but spoke to the conditions of our people, and provided some form of commonality throughout the diaspora, or from an information standpoint, at the very least.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the thing I also liked about the way Garvey used propaganda is that he totally got it. He totally recognized propaganda, and he was able to take most of the propaganda that existed and he countered it. He like turned it around, you know? Like instead of, the white star line, he had the black star line.
Mm-hmm.
And so on and so forth. So he recognized the propaganda and he was able to just maneuver in a manner where it was like a no-brainer. He just countered, do the opposite. I thought that was kind of brilliant, actually.
Yep.
And if no one has anything else to add, we could take a look at the answer for 17. So Garvey used propaganda through the Negro World newspaper, public speeches, and visual symbols, of course, such as the red, black, and green flag to promote his ideas and mobilize support. And we also saw how, how when the issue came up saying that everyone had a flag but the Poon. We saw how he handled that. So absolutely, absolutely. He was a master at countering propaganda and promoting our own propaganda.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes, he was a master chess player when he came to propaganda, as far as countering the propaganda that existed. My opinion. Anyway, if no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at question 18 as we cruise towards 10 o'clock. So question 18 says, how did contemporary historical events influence Garvey's ideology? Contemporary historical events. Anyone?
Couple things come to my mind would be, I guess the death of Booker T. Washington, or the writing of the autobiography, or being, living contemporary to Booker T. Washington, had an impact on his life. Him not being able to meet him physically, I think would have some impact, even though that's not stated, or may not be stated explicitly. But I think the biggest one early in his life would probably be World War One, 1914 and 1918. And the
The treatment is
how black soldiers felt coming back after the war, fighting for freedom for the nations, but then coming back to a segregated America. So my thoughts.
And even that makes you see how brutal it was to go to war, to fight for a country, and come back and being treated like I'm just still mind boggled about that. But those are stories for other days, I guess. But absolutely, definitely. Anyone else has anything to add? Brother Amina, Sister Amina, were you gonna add to that?
no, I'm gonna let you teach on that. How the
Okay,
historically, I think the World War One is fine.
absolutely. Okay, so if no one else has anything to add, we could look at the answer for 18. And yes, World War One was mentioned. So contemporary historical events such as World War One and the Russian Revolution influenced Garvey by highlighting the potential for change, and the importance of self-determination. Absolutely. Yes. No one else has anything to add? We can look at 19.
So how did the Russian Revolution?
Say that again?
I'm wondering about the Russian Revolution. What did that highlight for us?
Well, it's saying that those two events highlighted the potential for change and the importance of self-determination. So one way to look at it is, we could say that, we had this subservient kind of ideal going on. I mean, I'm just like paraphrasing now and adding my own stuff, but one way to look at it is certain things can bring about change. Like we had these soldiers going overseas, and they had to be great to survive.
Yeah, I know
And
about
then,
World War One, but I don't know necessarily about the revolution, the Russian Revolution, because that's other side of the world. But
well, I
perhaps
don't really know a whole lot about the Russian Revolution, but the people were revolting for better conditions. And so that showed them that we could do the same thing. We could do for self, and we could revolt when conditions, I mean, Garvey wasn't one that really waste time about revolting or marching. Garvey he just did stuff. He just start businesses. He was just 100% about creating better economic conditions. So he didn't really spend time lamenting, but he was driven by it. He was driven to make changes and to do better. So I guess that was his revolution. You know, I mean, I don't remember reading anything. He did do his. He did fight for laborers in his younger days. When he went to Cologne and different places, he was advocating for better conditions for workers on the banana plantation, what that was called. But he was, yeah, 100% advocating for better conditions. But then you see he got to a point where it became his mission to go on an economic rampage, so to speak, and just create and build and as many businesses. He was a master. He was an entrepreneur extraordinaire because he created all these businesses that impact Black people economically in a positive way, create jobs, and that was what he advocated. Not that you shouldn't, talk about economic conditions that are not favorable, but he basically just change economic condition. You don't like the schools, they're treating you bad. He would be like, let's start your own school, and let's get rid of these kind of curriculum that does not promote Black empowerment, Black beauty, and all that stuff. And you just do it. Don't complain about it. Let's do it. So that's what I feel, that these things, when you see that, people advocating for better conditions in some shape, form, or the other, or, when he saw how, Black people were treated, is my guess, but someone else might have a different spin on that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say you absolutely correct with that one. In fact, not too long ago, I just read what Mr. Garvey
You
was
turn up the
saying.
volume just a tad, Brother
Oh,
Mariam,
okay.
just a tad. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry about that. I
no
forget.
problem.
I'm in a car, so sometimes
You
my
said you
phone
were
goes.
reading something. You said you were reading something recently.
Yeah, I was reading after Stalin had died. I think it was Stalin. Mr. Garvey had wrote a letter. I think it was Stalin or Lenin. I forget which one, but he was talking about the Russian Revolution and the hope that it generated for nations across the globe who were fighting for self-determination and were being exploited by other nations. And so, they threw off the corrupt leaders, and, they were starting to, develop their own forms of government. They weren't forced to be democratic or otherwise. They could be socialist, communist, or whatever they wanted. And he supported their right to self-determination. And he saw that as, example of what we can do in Africa to regain control over our own, nations. And he, also the warriors coming back from World War II, after we just, went over, pretty much killed everything in Europe. We killed millions of Germans in France and Flanders and other places, and we demonstrated that we are equal to any other soldier in field of combat, and that as we were able to liberate the continent of Europe of these, scoundrels, that we can do the same on the continent of Africa and liberate our people there. So it showed him possibilities that could occur by seeing how other nations were, declaring during that period, Asia for the Asians, Europe for the Europeans, and naturally, we're gonna say Africa for the Africans. So it was a pretty exciting political time.
Absolutely. Yes, it was inspiration. Got inspiration to talk about Africa for the Africans. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else want to add anything to that? If not, we could take a look at
Yes.
19. Yeah, did you want to add something, Sister Amina?
No.
Okay. All right. So question 19 asks, what aspects of Garvey's ideology have had a lasting impact on subsequent movements? Anyone?
Yeah, in the 60s, the Black Power movement.
Yes.
All tried to do things that Garvey promoted.
Absolutely. I would say yes to that one. Anyone else? Okay. All right. If no one else has anything to add to that, we can take a look at that answer.
Yeah, I would probably throw civil rights in there.
Civil rights, yes, absolutely. So aspects of Garvey's ideology that have had a lasting impact, includes his emphasis on Black pride, economic sufficiency, and here's that word again, Pan-Africanism, which have influenced later civil rights and Black nationalist movement. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So let's take a look at question 20 if no one else has anything to add. So we can make this the last questions, or we can push for some more questions, but it is 10, so we can make this the last question and just wrap up with any discussion, question, comment, concern. But the last question pertains to the NAACP. And okay, so
What's the question again? That's 20.
it's I'm trying to see if I have the question. Question number 20. Okay, yes, so it reads, what was Garvey's relationship with the NAACP, and how did their approaches differ? Anyone? How did Garvey's approach differs with the NAACP?
I love to answer that one. Let me say that the NAACP was mostly a legal arm advocating civil rights and social assimilation, headquartered, I should say headed by the spin
Black
guards
and
were.
white. Right.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, you're
Oh, okay.
good.
Okay, yeah. I was saying the spin guards, who were the chairs for a long time on the NAACP. And of course, Du Bois was the chief ideologue with the Crisis magazine. His approach to integration, assimilation, and civil rights were different from Mr. Garvey's approach to, self-determination and not being financed by white philanthropists, etc.
Mhm,
As well as, not, forcing integration. He was
mhm,
just fine. Mr. Garvey was fine with separation, and in our separation, we would do for ourselves better and
mhm,
be able to, we weren't trying to match the white folks by working at McDonald's like they were working at McDonald's. We wanted to own our own
right.
restaurants like they own their restaurants. So it was a different ideology. In fact, the UNIA used to nickname the NAACP "Nothing Accomplished After Considerable Pretense," because we didn't think they were nearly as effective as we were in organizing.
Mhm,
But yeah, there were day and night differences between that entity, which you later found out were working again with military intelligence and not looking
yeah,
out for our best interests.
it's terrible. Absolutely. Anyone else has anything to add? It kind of reminds me a little bit of um Marcus Garvey's philosophy versus Martin Luther King's philosophy, even though they kind of started to see eye to eye and merge a little more.
You know what? Garvey
Um,
King was
before their
promoting civil
untimely
rights.
death.
Was promoting civil rights. Garvey promoted black people doing it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So if no one else has anything else to add, we'll take a look at
What time?
the
How long we
answer.
go?
Say that again, Sister Amina.
Is this our last question?
We were going to make this the last question, unless you want to go a little more.
No, it's after 10, so that means
I thought you thought, okay. So the answer to that last question is that Garvey's relationship with the NAACP was often contentious, as the NAACP focused on integration and legal equality, while Garvey emphasized separatism and economic independence, doing for self. Absolutely. All answers were correct. So yes, there you have it. We come to the end of another exciting session. Any questions, comments, concern before we move to close? Anyone have anything to add? As always, I just like to thank everyone for their participation.
thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Sister Diane. Another a great program tonight.
Yes. Okay. If no one else has anything to add, I'm getting used to asking Brother Mariamar to close us out. If you don't mind doing us the honor, Brother Mariamar.
Yes, and of course not. And actually, would mind closing with the of allegiance, if you don't mind. It was
That'll be fine.
written by it was written by what's her name? Name getting tongue tied now. Noni G.
Okay.
It was written also by it was three sisters actually. Noni G, Beulah McDonald, and I forgot the third sister's name, but it's a
Okay.
beautiful pledge. So anyone can put their hands on their hearts and follow along with me. I
Okay.
commit my body, mind, and spirit to the protection, defense, and security of the red, black, and green. I dedicate my life to the redemption of Mother Africa and the liberation of her scattered black children. I accept for myself and my descendants the teachings of universal African nationalism.
Awesome.
Instilled with
Awesome.
the purpose and knowledge of themselves as African people, in order that the cause of our struggle would neither falter nor fail, until all black people are free and united under one God, one name.
Name one
One
destiny.
destiny.
Grace first.
Grace first. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much. We appreciate what you're telling us.
Yes. Peace, love, and blessing, everyone. Until next time.
Race
Race
first, family.
first.
Grace first.
Race first.